Good morning and good afternoon to everybody. On behalf of the UNESCO Regional Office for Education, I bid you welcome. All of you who are participating today in this technical regional meeting of the World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development. We will work in a panel. I am the moderator. I'm Christian Bravo. I'm the consultant for the UNESCO Regional Office for Education in Santiago. And we shall now give the floor to Claudio Uribe, the director of the Santiago Regional Office, for an introduction and some words of welcome. Director Claudio Uribe. Thank you, Christian. Good morning, good afternoon to those who are with us today. Thank you for participating in this regional technical meeting for Latin America and the Caribbean after the World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development, ESD, which was organized virtually from the 17th to the 19th of May with the support of the government of the German Federal Republic. I would like to welcome all representatives of member states and organizations who are going to be part of this dialogue. And I include all those who are now, right now, following this event through the direct transmission on our YouTube channel of UNESCO Santiago. Our meeting today has as an objective to give you information on the main milestones of the World Conference and the Declaration of Berlin on ESD, which was just adopted, and which sets out the path to the implementation of the roadmap of ESD 2030. In these last 10 years, up to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. We are now in an excellent international panel which will contribute different experiences which are being applied in Costa Rica, Ecuador, Trinidad and Tobago, Argentina, and Brazil on ESD. I thank you for your generous participation at this panel. In November 2020, we were meeting in a similar event and launched the new framework and roadmap for ESD 2020 and the SDGs. We strengthened the ESD framework. The idea is to give people the knowledge and the capacity and the values so as to set up a more inclusive, equitable, and peaceful world as we can find it in SDG 4 and particularly 4.7 on transformative education. This holistic approach of ESD is more relevant than ever at these times of pandemic. And we have seen how urgent it is to find alternative paths for growth and a new connection to our environment. We have to act on behalf of our planet right now. That is a clear message of Stefania Giannini, the ADG for Education of UNESCO, declared at the World Conference last week. And she said quite clearly that to face climate change, the immense loss of biodiversity, the extreme inequality, and the threat of future pandemics consists in individual and collective transformation to change our world. And education is essential to reach this objective. It's essential so that everybody in the different parts of our societies can learn and act in a sustainable and responsible way. Our planet is fragile and is threatened. That is why we have to face all these crises right now. For far too long, we assumed that humanity could intervene and change nature without any consequences, and today we're paying for that. Consequence of the measures taken to reduce the impact of the pandemic, now we have to set up innovative solutions to reuse all those face masks which are thrown away. But we also need food, and the packages have to be recycled properly. In a number of countries, these recycling systems have broken down. And the UN Environment Program, UNEP, says that if we don't take measures to dispose of the 70% of plastics which are thrown into oceans and rivers, 12% will have to be burned, and that will in turn affect the environment of our planet considerably. Catastrophe is lurking for us and our future generations. The conference said, learn for the planet. And an inquiry was launched so as to find out to what extent environmental matters were integrated in policies and curricula of primary and secondary education in 46 UNESCO member states. Over and above educational policies, we found that more than half of these programs did not include climate change, and only 19% referred to biodiversity. Mexico and Costa Rica participated for Latin America and the Caribbean. This conclusion coincides with the results achieved at the fourth regional comparative study 2019, at which 19 countries of our region have participated. And this was carried out by the Latin American Laboratory for Evaluation of Quality of Education, which we all know. This study carried out a curricular analysis to see to what extent ESD was present in the curricula of the third and the sixth grade, and which were the big criteria and values which were included. As to ideas connected with ESD, we mainly find environmental and ecological matters in 14 of the countries examined, but we also found that relevant ideas like climate change, pollution, complex systems, economics, carbon neutrality were hardly present in curricula, which shows how important it is to deepen education for sustainable development in all the countries of our region. Curriculars are set out and don't necessarily correspond fully to what teachers actually teach. And we don't know what happens in classrooms in detail, but we have to examine educational policy so that contents, capacities, and values are present in them so that our societies can hand them down to future generations. ESD gives us an excellent opportunity to carry out in-depth changes in the long term, to understand challenges of the present and the future, so that the population becomes fully aware of climate change, of social, cultural, and economic change, and learns how to face it with engagement. The 5 priority areas of ESD for 2020 center on teacher training, an integral approach to educational centers, to the participation and engagement of youth, and empowerment of communities to this end. More than ever before, we need transformative education to develop critical thinking, knowledge, attitudes, and values to face these challenges. but also to build collective agendas to try and rebuild and reconstruct our societies after the crisis. This is what we're inviting you to today. Please join our efforts to strengthen education for sustainable development so as to set up more equitable societies engaged into sustainable development in harmony with humanity and its environment. I wish you an excellent debate today. Thank you for your attention. And we are at the disposal of UNESCO to give our full support. Christian. Thank you, Director, for these valuable words and the motivation you're giving us to continue this important debate in our panel. Firstly, I'd like to describe how we are going to structure our meeting. We heard Mrs. Claudia Uribe, and now we will look at the roadmap for ESD for 2030 and its milestones. Then we will listen to a panel of good practices for country initiatives on ESD, questions and answers to the members of the panel to improve ESD implementation in these countries, and then we'll have a dialogue on the way forward to see what is expected of our office and what is expected of individual member states in the framework of ESD policies. And then we come to the closing. Please, during the panel, include your questions in the Q&A on the bottom of your screen. We are going to go through them and give them to the panelists so that they can reply and give their impressions on your questions. And we'll have an open dialogue. If you wish to take the floor, please raise your hand and open your microphone. Another recommendation, we want to reach a broad participation, which is why we'd ask you, please, to be brief. And after this meeting, we'll send you by email all the presentations and the documents and all information on this panel. So now I'm going to briefly explain some main issues of the roadmap ESD for 2030. In November 2020, we launched the roadmap for ESD for 2020. This is a global framework for the implementation of ESD. Education for sustainable development has become more and more important to promote sustainability in all our policies, as well as the contribution of education for humanity and its survival. We have to think and rethink where and how we want to learn. Because in fact, we have to give lifelong learning for everybody about sustainable development, social, economic sustainability, so that they can take individual initiatives on behalf of humanity as a whole at all levels, local, national, and international. The Secretary General of the United Nations says we are in a battle for our lives, but it is a battle we can win. So the question is, how can we prepare students of all ages for them to participate in this battle? This is part of the framework. This needs to be done. We have SDG 47. That is the center of all we do. And we want to change learning environments and learning content centered on students, project centered, and these environments have to include a holistic approach of everything students learn so that they can understand what they learn and live what they learn. Sustainability should be included in all teaching, and sustainable capacity building means that then they can include this in a development in model, cooperating with other people in their own communities. We also have to question ourselves on learning contents and outcomes, centering on curricula, but we have to see in which way development and the different items of the sustainability agenda is included. Climate change, for example, should be included in different dimensions of learning. And it's very important to think about the results of what our students learn. The idea is to empower them to take responsibility and act in the present for the future, contributing to social transformation. And that is how we want to bring about the social transformation to build a more sustainable world.
Key features of this roadmap: emphasis on education's role for the 17 SDGs, emphasis on member states' leadership, and focus on the big transformation. Now, when we speak of big transformation, what do we mean? We mean individual transformation, because in the end, education for sustainable development simply means that people themselves, the individuals, will have to be able to challenge their own environment, their own way of living, their own way of thinking and talking and being in this world, and also promote this big transformation at societal level. Also, this big transformation requires a certain level of implementation, i.e., people to be able to leave their comfort zones. Think outside the box means courage, persistence, determination at various levels, because transformation is also multi-leveled. The best source is personal thinking, personal feeling of what ought to be done. To continue with the presentation, let me tell you that this framework goes into the 5 priority action areas that have been defined in the Global Action Program of UNESCO from 2014 to 2019. And again, these priority action areas are laid before the member states so that everybody can use them in order to be able to implement ESD in their various policies through regional, local, municipal policies. And it's also a call, obviously, to change entirely the whole focus of education, promoting the effort of educational institutions where students can actually live what they're learning and learn what they're living. This is absolutely essential for absolutely everybody. Centers, educational centers, people attending these educational centers, developing their own skills as to be able to promote and facilitate this big transformation that is called upon. And also focus on the involvement of everybody, particularly young people, to work in favor of sustainable development, and finally, empowering the local communities and carrying out local action. So these are the 5 priority action areas. And we shall also be taking a look at the various strategies in the various countries for sustainable development and how they link up with these various priority areas. From that vantage point, obviously, UNESCO has made available a number of mechanisms to support this process. On the one hand, as I said earlier, we're promoting national strategies. In the end, a national strategy that would include the various initiatives that are already being implemented in the country in the area of education for sustainable development, as well as new strategies to strengthen what is going on. It is important, obviously, not just to carry out new educational programs in order to be able to work in favor of education for sustainable development, rather refocus what we already have, regear what we already have. We don't necessarily have to start from scratch. Far from that. We already have a great deal that we have achieved. And the point is to work on what we have already achieved, making sure that this is done in connection with other countries, with other territories, with other regions, to learn from the success of other countries in other regions in these areas. So this network will also make it possible to establish, thanks to the initiatives in the various countries, to establish a constant process of monitoring and assessment. And likewise, we will be making a major effort in communication. Communicating for action, communicating for SDGs and the role of education, with various initiatives and studies that will be delivered to help take local and regional decisions. Finally, UNESCO from now on will engage in evidence-informed implementation and resource mobilization to monitor emerging issues and trends and mobilize resources to support ESD implementation. So what are the next steps in this implementation? Right now, we find ourselves in 2021, that is to say, building the initial momentum for all of this. This came from the conference that just had in Berlin for sustainable development at world level, and the follow-up regional conferences and the country initiatives that I was mentioning before. Then we have a midterm period, 2022, 2024, first stage in implementation and the first meeting of the network that I was just mentioning. Then we're going to have a midterm review in 2025, which is going to be the first progress report. The countries involved and the participants will be asked which were the main challenges that they had to face in their efforts to implement the new education for sustainable development framework. And then in 2030, there's going to be a final review. Before that, obviously, in 2026, 2029, we will have reinforced implementation leading to the final review I mentioned for 2030. Now, what happened at the conference on ESD? Let me tell you that the conference was held virtually from 17-19 May 2021, as the director said, and it gathered more than 2,800 participants from 161 countries, with an additional 10,000 viewers on the public live stream through YouTube and other platforms. The report, Learn for Our Planet, was launched at the event. An analysis of the extent to which environmental curricula is embedded in UNESCO member states. This is a report that the director already mentioned, Learn for Our Planet. Absolutely essential in the various countries to know exactly how education and the environment are linked with each other and how they're reflected in the curricula. On the basis of which, there is a concern because less than 50% of the countries do have an explicit inclusion of this type of information in their curriculum. Finally, conference ended with the Berlin Declaration on Education for Sustainable Development. This declaration called for urgent action to accelerate sustainability and climate action through education, with a very strong commitment towards ESD. So with all of this information, let's now move to our eminent panel. You can see them, you can see their faces on the screen now. We shall hear from Mr. Henry Arias from Costa Rica. He will be telling us about the development of education for sustainable development policies in Costa Rica. Ms. Pizarro from Buenos Aires. She will also talk about the green areas to transform education, joint with the presentation of the Vice Minister of Education of the Ministry of Education of Ecuador, Cynthia Game, and Ana Maria Luz, Director of the Ecology Project International from Ecuador. Very interesting initiative on how to involve all of these subjects in the curriculum and in educational institutions. Then we shall have the participation of Ms. Kermira Golston, UNESCO ESD Youth Ambassador. She's at Trinidad and Tobago right now. She will be telling us what to do in order to get young people involved in education for sustainable development. And finally, Felipe de Sousa from the Sao Paulo Municipal Secretariat of Education. And he will be also addressing the same subject from the Brazilian vantage point. And now, that's the end of my presentation, and I will ask Mr. Henry Arias to take over. In the meantime, I will share with you a very short presentation or introduction to our panelist. Henry, as you get ready, I'm going to introduce you briefly. As I was saying, this is the best practices panel for the Latin American Caribbean region. We have various presentations, and at the end of the panel, we shall have question and answer to the various panelists. This will be a point of entry into the next issue. Henry Arias, advisor to the Minister of Education of Costa Rica. Among his functions, he's coordinator of the implementation of the EDS policy, Secretary General of the National Policy for Sustainable Consumption, Ministerial Representative for Sanitation of Residual or Wastewaters, for the Central American Program on awareness of the need to face climate change. And as I was saying, he's going to tell us about the national experience for the development of education for sustainable development policies in Costa Rica. Dear Henry, over to you. Well, good morning. Can you hear me well? Yes, we can hear loud and clear. First of all, let me thank the UNESCO Regional Office for their invitation and giving me this opportunity to tell you about the Costa Rican experiences as regards EDS, or ESD rather, Education for Sustainable Development Policies. After the communication of the 2030 Agenda, Costa Rica felt the need to re-gear its efforts as to implement at national level that particular agenda, the various goals thereof. And so we created a national forum for the development of sustainable development education. And Costa Rica established by decree within the Ministry of Planning a particular unit devoted to this, which means that all of the ministries, again, have to refocus on a roadmap to implement sustainable development goals, particularly number 4. What are the steps that are required in order to reach goal 4, particularly 4.7, in the light of the World Action Program and in the light also of the World Framework for Development, Sustainable Development, which took place at the end of 2014. So our questions to ourselves were, what are the main challenges to education for sustainable development? One, the need to develop a conceptual framework for education for sustainable development. To have a language that is a single language that we all understand, so we all understand each other and know what we're talking about. What is EDS? How is that integrated into education? With a view to the 17 SDGs. And in the light of the Costa Rican experience, there was one thing to avoid, was oversimplistic conceptualization, something that could not be really understood because it would be far too abstract. It had to be completely cross-cutting. It had to go across the whole of the curriculum and not just in any one particular subject matter, but in education throughout. Also to promote institutional coordination I don't know in other countries, but at times we in Costa Rica are not pretty good at coordinating our own national efforts, making sure that the various stakeholders in society are participating. I'm not only speaking about the professionals in education, but also community-based organizations that are interested in education and drumming up the support of the citizenry in general, and associate educational programs with a view to the 2030 agenda, articulating cooperation for environmental education with SED, ESD, Education for Sustainable Development. Environmental education is absolutely essential because we've been working a great deal on environmental education, but environmental education has been kept in a way outside the education for sustainable development, as odd as it may seem. And it was necessary to establish the necessary linkages, refocusing all of the necessary cooperation efforts along these lines. We've seen, for instance, that some educational centers that have a great deal of cooperation that they undertake, but there are other areas in the country where there's no cooperation. It is not felt. It's not to be seen anywhere. So it's tremendous disparity between some cooperation-rich areas and cooperation-poor areas. And so the idea is to overcome these gaps. The idea is to make sure that this coordination is done nationally, that this cooperation effort is done throughout the country and not just some isolated pockets where coordination and cooperation is thriving. No, we need that to extend throughout the country. And therefore, we need monitoring and assessment and research processes to make sure that this is taking place. And one very important thing as well is that it's going to have to be an educational policy with an action plan. Because we're already talking about what, but what is important is also the how. The how. How are we going to do it? Who is going to do it? When is it going to be done? So not just what, but also who, how, why, when, where. All of this is essential. We must find answers to all these questions. Now, all of this leads to the setting up of the Higher Education Council that I said yesterday, which is the maximum organ, maximum body in education in Costa Rica. This is the executive arm, as it were, of our government. That's where they approve policies, they approve the curricula. All of these initiatives of a national scope are developed there. And the Higher Council is directed by the Minister of Education himself or herself. And it sent to the whole of the administration 2 agreements at 2 different times. The first agreement was in 2016, urging the administration to participate with public and private institutions in the working out of educational policies and a national strategy for sustainable development and the environment. That was in 2016. Very complex process. And I'll tell you later about this. The office, the UNESCO office of Costa Rica helped us a great deal. And also there was an agreement in 2020, that was last year, to approve the education policy for sustainable development and its action plan. This was finally adopted last year. What is the purpose of this? To promote a space where ministerial structures are taken advantage of in order to promote sustainable development education, focused not just on the student, but also on the teacher, on public officials, through cross-cutting curriculum and lifelong learning. When the policy is formulated, we're not only thinking of the first axis of action, or the first line of action of the World Action Program, but also lines of action 2 and 3, where the areas where the ministry is particularly active in the whole of the educational system and institutions in Costa Rica. We're speaking here specifically about some specific goals. The purpose is to make sure there'll be a sea change in curricular approaches. what the educational offer is in Costa Rica. It's got to be changed to promote this holistic vision of sustainable development education, as Christian said, bringing about an intergenerational commitment, overcoming the generation gap, overcoming all of the existing possible gaps, making sure that this clear call for action in the area of sustainable development and the necessary linkage to environmental education is brought about through the formal and informal educational processes in Costa Rica. Making sure that all the members of the educational community are conversant with this new concept, lively concept of what education for sustainable development is. Not just a subject matter to be learned, but something to be lived, to be experienced, to make sure that the needs of the present and future generations are met. Having a model for sustainable development that will go on and on for many years to come. The idea is for all the stakeholders to become owners of this idea. In other words, it's a sense of ownership of all the people involved. This is the only way to go. This has been a very enriching experience, as you can well imagine. Highly difficult, but this has been a sea change in the formulation of educational policies, because we now have an education plan that can be easily traceable, easily monitorable, easier to assess, to see exactly how it is applied, even in times of a pandemic like now, will help us to get through this. These are the key features of what we've been doing so far, which I wanted to share with you, and I thank you very much indeed for your attention. Thank you. Thank you. If you can now stop sharing your screen so that I can call on our next panelist.
You see how important it is to work intersectorally when setting up policies and to work on different levels, not only for contents, but also integrate contents intersectorally and cross-cuttingly in the country. We now give the floor to Mrs. Angelica Gomez Pizarro. She studied communication and ESD at the UNESCO chair. She has a vast experience, and since 2018, she deals with education at the Ministry for Education of Argentina, particularly in the city of Buenos Aires. She's going to share with us her experience with green schools. Thank you, Christian. I hope you can hear me properly. Yes, thank you, Angelica. It's an honor to be able to participate at this event on ESD. We thank the regional office for inviting us to talk to you about our experience in the city of Buenos Aires. As Christian already said, I work at the Ministry for Education of the city of Buenos Aires. Education for sustainability, particularly we have green schools and a global approach, 3 different projects for sustainable development. The objective of the Ministry of Education is to design, implement, and manage public policies so that people become active members of the process of education. Buenos Aires has about 3 million inhabitants, 3 million, which is a big challenge for urban sustainable development and a more inclusive and resilient city, which is what we want to build. But we have a unique opportunity here. We try and set up a curriculum for sustainability in the Ministry of Education of Buenos Aires. That was the result of an engagement of the city towards sustainability and sustainable development, and the conviction that sustainable development is part and parcel for quality education, to educate citizens which know what challenges of this new century are. And it became concrete in the green schools, which have been existing for now 10 years. The educational system of the city of Buenos Aires includes more than 2,000 institutions, public and private schools, and we are addressing ourselves to students, teachers, administrative people, everybody who works in the educational system. Our mission consists in promoting education for a sustainable, equitable, fair, and diversified future, and we apply a cross-cutting approach. Green schools. This was initiated 10 years ago. Started like a minor program, a pilot program, 40 schools, also for waste disposal and separate waste disposal. And now it has broadened a lot. We work on 4 main action plans, contents. That's where we start from. That's what our previous speakers were mentioning. How can we integrate environmental and sustainability issues in the curricula? And then we prepare manuals and material for teachers to bring this up in their classroom. The second priority is teacher training. And we design training courses for students, but mainly for teachers, so that they dare to bring up these subjects in the classrooms. Third priority, pedagogical support. We offer assistance and support for all these projects, and since 2014, we offer retraining towards green schools, and we support all their projects because you can't go green overnight. A school has to transform slowly into a green school. It's a cultural change in the institutional structure of the school, which now opens up to society. And the fourth priority in the green schools would be environmental management, concrete action, because it's useless to talk about things theoretically, recycling and waste disposal. We have to become practical and propose projects, and we also have to provide the material to the green schools for environmental management projects. We work on various subjects. We've learned a lot these years. Claudio was talking about transformation, which starts with ourselves. Well, we also have been changing as green schools were growing. We talked about circular economy, responsible consumption. We work on diversity, on local problems, on pollution, for example, the Riachuelo River, which is extremely polluted, energy efficiency, climate change, and other subjects. And what we wanted to tell you about these green schools is that we work with all participants of the educational community, but clearly we center on students and the way in which they are integrated in the learning process. Whatever the program will propose starts from the premise that students are in the center and they are the driving force of the cultural change. They have to play an important role to face the challenges of our world today. And to go with them in all this, we propose a holistic approach which analyzes education critically, leads us to transformative education. Students have to think about our lifestyle and development model, but not only theoretically, they have to become active in this reality of which we are all a part of. And we work with teachers to improve their teaching strategies so that students and learners can really live the environment they are in so that they can develop independent decision making. And the idea is that they should become social actors. So we further projects for learning, for environmental problems within the school and the community as a whole, and also practical services which students can render responsibly to become active. And these learning environments, and we said it was very important to broaden them, become more inclusive, beyond the school as such. What they have learned and been trained for in the classroom should be implemented practically for the community and together with civil society. I would like to tell you now about a project quite briefly. I know I don't have much time. This is Lugano in the province of Buenos Aires in 2015. They started this project, The Ship That Saves Lives. Different teachers have carried this out, social sciences, energy technology, with their teachers. They worked on shipbuilding with ecological criteria and recycling. And they build these environment-friendly rafts, thinking particularly of the very polluted river Riachuelo, which is close to the city of Buenos Aires, and their school is close to that river. This is because industry is very polluting along that river and has been for decades. And they worked with the neighbors in that region so that their project has the major local impact. And they tried to find solutions with their environmentally friendly rafts, and they were preparing materials to build them. And they also developed some plants within that project. And in 2020, neighbors invited them to an explanatory event, and they organized the first students forum and exchanged experiences of educational projects. So we can learn from that experience, from this one and many others. That is how we can work through networks, and not only within the schools. We can include the local community and the neighborhoods to find solutions for the problems which exist. And there are many other such projects which are very inspiring, in fact. Here I give you a few links. You can find the projects, their content, and the materials we use for them. Thank you for your time and for your attention. Thank you, dear Angelica. That is a very valuable experience. Thank you also for the links. The next presentation is about the experience of curricula for Galapagos, Ecuador. We have two distinguished panelists. One of them is Cynthia Game, Vice Minister of Education. She is a PhD in education of the University San Marcos of Peru. She trained at the University of Guayaquil and has a vast experience in teacher training, initial education, basic and high education, and works at UCSG in the Latin American network on behalf of Ecuador. Ana Maria Luz will also participate. She's a journalist and leads the ecology project for Ecuador. She is a director of a transpiring foundation. She prepares programs and empowerment for youth, experience education, and collaborative work and private-public partnerships. Vice Minister. Good morning, good afternoon. I greet you all. It's a pleasure to talk to you about this work, which is led by the state, civil society, and the whole community of Galapagos. This curriculum in context goes hand in hand with a problem of our times. Students have to go back to the classroom. So we want to change curricula from the point of view of sustainability. The Galapagos Islands are on another time zone and are quite different from continental Ecuador. And so we have to approach their curricula from the point of view of their own reality. We have to really question whether what people learn is relevant for their daily life and whether it fits in with their reality and the context within which they live. And that's how this initiative came about. The different participants of civil society are part of it. And social organizations have launched this. Within informal education, this new curriculum was developed. It takes over, of course, the general national curriculum. The Ministry of Education is part of the Pact for Development, and the whole of the Agenda 2030 is included here, and particularly the environmental part through sustainability. Years ago already, the Ministry of Education started with its project, Everybody's Earth. And this is a project for national parks in the whole of Ecuador. And since 1998, in fact, the first special law for Galapagos was enacted. And what is important is an integral educational reform for Galapagos. And In 2019, contents on environment society of Galapagos are included in the curricula. Already in 2015, we introduced a teacher training program based on SDGs. And this is taken up in November 2020 in a public-private partnership so as to improve education in Galapagos for it to become more pertinent and for it to better apply to the reality of the islands. And then these technical workshops were set up so as to prepare a curriculum within the context of the Galapagos Islands so that all main actors of Galapagos are included and participate. And then in March 2021, the Ministry of Education adopts a curriculum applied to the Galapagos context based on sustainability. And we conclude a ministerial agreement with a number of papers and documents for this. The curriculum is cross-cutting for education as a whole, and then it is applied in the islands based on sustainability. In 2020, the pandemic hit, so we set priorities. And in 2021, what we are teaching is an emergency curriculum. Not that it's changed, but there are priorities are set and there are different methods applied to teach according to the lines of this curriculum. And after this, we now reached a curriculum which applies specifically in the context of the Galapagos Islands. The process of participation is the starting point for such innovation. That is how these new modalities could be proposed and made concrete. And of course, the objective is that students should come back to the classroom.
The idea here is not just to work from the school, but also from the academy, from the government, through NGOs, etc. Sort of a multi-stakeholder approach, so that public policy making today is the first step to think outside the box in education. So we have these bureaus of educational articulation, as we call them, Mesa de Articulación Educativa. These are simply sort of councils, advisory bodies that are set up, where the various main actors in education, from school principals to associations of teachers, parent teachers associations, etc. All of them put their heads together to see how best to implement the ESD-based curriculum throughout the territory. You need, first of all, to identify the needs, obviously, because you cannot do this in an abstract way. It's not just updating a curriculum to make it modern, to make it a little bit more appealing, but no, you have to identify the real needs, the necessities, the needs, the requirements of the people, so that they can visualize what is going on, so that they can see what the actions required are, so that they can get involved and participate fully. Thank you, Madam Vice Minister. Let me carry on with the presentation. We're already behind time, so I'll be very short. I only wanted to emphasize the process that we worked on in order to make sure that the Galapagos curriculum involved totally the whole concept of education for sustainable development with the 17 SDGs included in the Galapagos curriculum. So right now, there are more than 60 main actors coming from different sectors. I'm not just talking about education, but academia, government, as the Vice Minister said earlier, NGOs, community-based organizations, civil society, private sector. So so we create these bureaus made up of actors from all of these areas that I have mentioned. And let me tell you very quickly how we go about things. What was the whole process of curriculum building? We started with a conceptual framework. The conceptual framework was based on three major elements. First of all, the Action for Sustainable Development from UNESCO, SDG 4, the Galapagos experience and international experience. After that, we used as a reference framework in several of these bureaus that we created. We had a number of meetings involving more than 120 actors from major sectors, production sector, industry, NGOs, community-based organizations. What was the purpose of that work? To define the 14 major subjects that Galapagos considered was absolutely necessary for relevant learning. These 14 subjects are based on the three major lines of sustainable action proposed by UNESCO: the economy, interdependence with the environment, and the society. Within these 14 major subjects, we have very many similarities because some of them actually overlap each other. But does it really matter? Because what is essential is that we have all of these key items, key subjects on which we focus in order to protect the natural environment of that jewel of humanity, which is the Galapagos Islands. So we did a great deal of technical spade work, laid down the basis for the curriculum with people from the ministry, from academia, from community-based organizations, from teacher training colleges. The idea was to analyze the whole of the national curriculum of Ecuador to make sure that this be brought into line with the subject of sustainability, and particularly as it is going to be taught in Galapagos, because the teacher must be part and parcel of this effort from the word go. For instance, when we speak about the economy, food security immediately is of the essence. And the Galapagos curriculum takes into account each of the knowledge areas that are connected with these various sustainability subjects. And so interdisciplinary work is promoted, which is absolutely key to getting the proper outcome. It's not just cooperating for the sake of cooperation. It is cooperating to make sure that all of these subjects are approached intersectorally in a cross-cutting fashion. In the end, the idea is that whatever instruments may come out of this process will help the curriculum to be updating itself, as it were, throughout all of the school years or even in a lifelong learning process, so as to be able also to help in teacher training colleges, for instance. Is already adopted by the ministry. As the minister said, what's interesting is that this is coming back to Galapagos. This started in Galapagos. From Galapagos, it went to Ecuador. Ecuador said, oh, this is very, very interesting. And then from Ecuador came back to Galapagos, which is very important, which means, therefore, the Galapagos has made a tremendous input into this. And in the end, to conclude, simply to share the opportunities that we had as a community through this curriculum in this new context, which is sustainability-based, to develop skills in the students that are necessary for the sustainable development of Galapagos, and to strengthen teacher training in sustainable development, which is absolutely key. And this curriculum also promotes local action. Big challenges, obviously, because there's a certain amount of resistance, because people are made to leave their comfort zone, think outside the box. This is not easy, but it's necessary to carry out a proper evaluation. The ministry said that this has got to be evaluated, it's got to be assessed, and therefore everybody has to take part in this and with the necessary political support from the government. And that is a conclusion of our presentation. Thank you very much indeed for your attention to all of you. Thank you, Vice Minister and Ana Maria, for sharing your experience with us, showing how the link between the private and the public sector, the participation of the government, can actually bring about great changes. I'm sure that the participants are going to be interested, so please share with us all the information you have. And now, Mrs. Colmira Guston from Trinidad and Tobago. She's got a master's degree in integrated development of coastal areas, extremely important person in the sustainable development of island nations. She's one of the members of the UNESCO network, and she's particularly interested in a number of subjects that are all linked to sustainable development and young people. How this has got to do with the various public projects that are carried out, she will be telling us about her experience.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you for having me, everyone. I'll go right into the presentation. So my name is Camilla Galston, and I'm from Trinidad and Tobago. That we having some technical difficulties. Okay, so I'm going to be focusing on empowering and mobilizing youth. So a week ago, during my UNESCO Education for Sustainable Development plenary session, someone asked me, what is your greatest obstacle and how did you overcome it? My greatest obstacle as a young person is that we are not meaningfully engaged. So this is mainly due to the fact that a lot of persons have a skewed perception of what meaningful engagement really means. So meaningful engagement, just as an overview, is a person-centered process that encourages and invites participatory approaches. It involves consultation with stakeholders on how they would like to be engaged, contributing ideas, skills, and abilities while recognizing that the individual participation may vary. It involves active listening and dialogue. It involves open expression of opinions, facilitating this without fear of judgment or dismissal. And it involves being able to influence what happens next and make decisions that matter. So in many classrooms, concepts are presented at the theoretical level, but few students have the opportunity to apply and interpret these concepts to their everyday lives, or are even given the opportunity to participate in some form of dialogue to enhance their understanding. To facilitate meaningful engagement, students need to understand the concepts within their context, or else there's no way to connect these issues to what needs to be addressed. So allow me to share personal experience. During my primary school level education, I learned a lot about climate change, global warming, but I live in Trinidad and Tobago, which is a tropical climate. The textbooks provided examples of melting polar ice caps and the effect of climate change on polar bears and penguins. Of course, I felt sorry for the displaced animals, but if it wasn't for my grandfather giving me a real example of what climate change meant for our small island developing state, I would have never been able to understand the linkage and how to address climate change within my context. And unfortunately, a lot of persons move through the education system thinking that global issues such as climate change, gender inequality, clean water and sanitation do not affect them or their communities. Or even if it does affect them, they assume that they have to rely on an international entity or the state to address the issue. and it is not always simple to connect dots. Thankfully, I had a lot of mentors in my life who guided me and helped me understand how I can make a difference and contribute to the world that I live in. So I believe that it was imperative to be a role model for persons, and also drive home the initiatives and make sure that persons understand that we are all aiming for sustainable development, but are not having enough conversations with persons who are affected the most. So priority area 4 of the ESD document speaks to empowering and mobilizing youth. Over the past 5 years, my colleagues and I partnered with government agencies, educational institutions, the United Nations, the European Union, and civil society organizations to educate young persons on the Sustainable Development Goals and what it should mean to them, and also show them how they can promote change within their communities. So we targeted a diverse group of young people, primary school children, secondary school children, at-risk youth from low-income communities, children with disabilities, university level students, and young professionals. We had to adjust the language and presentation style to suit each target audience. Our goal was to facilitate a space where they are able to have discussions among each other, and also to present ideas that they are passionate about and help them shape these ideas into real action. So we sat with them during the different workshop sessions and help them brainstorm how ways that they could create action on the ground and within their communities. And also keeping in mind that they need to understand who are the gatekeepers, because in society there are a number of barriers in terms of social systems and institutional systems that create barriers for education. But how do we get around this? And within the COVID context, we are faced with a number of challenges, and it did set our goals back. But in my country, schools were closed, gatherings over 10 persons were not permitted. Many students didn't have access to devices to be able to participate in online learning. And I've witnessed a lot of cases where, because of increased poverty levels, children that were supposed to be spending time in the classrooms were spending time trying to earn a living. However, we cannot get disenchanted or disengaged. We need to get innovative, find ways where we can reach persons at the community level, because education is the most powerful weapon that can be used to change the world. Based on the saying by Nelson Mandela, over the years, we have definitely recognized the importance of meaningful engagement through education in shaping the narrative of sustainable communities. Thank you.
Many thanks, Cormira, for sharing this amazing personal and collective experience with us today. Cormira nos ha mostrado hoy cómo las herramientas más poderosas para lograr cambios es inspirar a las personas a ser parte de las soluciones globales. Les recuerdo a todos y a todas también que está habilitado la caja de preguntas y respuestas para que podamos luego dirigir las preguntas a nuestros panelistas el día de hoy. Y si bien estamos pasados un poco en el tiempo, creo que tenemos una gran oportunidad acá de conocer experiencias que nos pueden acompañar y ayudar en el desarrollo de iniciativas país de DS 2030. Entonces, para cerrar el excelente panel de hoy, damos la bienvenida al señor Felipe da Souza, director del Núcleo Técnico de Currículum en la Coordinación Pedagógica de la Secretaría Mundial de Educación de Sao Paulo. Actualmente, Felipe es candidato a doctor en Educación por la Universidad de Sao Paulo y tiene una maestría en Artes de la Universidad Federal de Sao Paulo. Es especialista en ética, valores y ciudadanía y en estudio de idiomas y lingüística, licenciado en literatura y pedagogía, y se desempeñó como docente de portugués en la Red Municipal de Educación de Sao Paulo durante 11 años, donde ocupa hoy el cargo de coordinador pedagógico. Compartirá con nosotros hoy su experiencia en Sao Paulo para involucrar a las comunidades en los procesos educativos. Estimado Felipe, bienvenido, muchas gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Adelante, por favor.
Gracias, buenos días, ¿me escucha?
Sí, te escuchamos perfecto, puedes compartir tu pantalla.
Okay. Ahora primero quiero agradecerles por...
First of all, I should like to thank you for this opportunity to share my experience with you from the city of São Paulo, and to be able to speak about our experience with Sustainable Development Goals as they are included in the educational curriculum of Sao Paulo. I'm working at present at the Secretariat of Education. I direct the curriculum department, where we play a major role in promoting education for sustainable development in the city. A few figures about the city of Sao Paulo. 1 million learners, children, young people, adults, 85,000 education professionals, 4,000 educational units. We cooperate with UNESCO. We've produced curriculum reforms and the necessary literature in which we have included a number of guidelines to strengthen education for sustainable development throughout the school system of the city. Here you have some examples on the screen right now of the documents that we have been able to produce for children, primary school, secondary school, for the education for people with disabilities, and for young people and adults. All of this material obviously focus on the relevant educational development goals, sustainable development goals. And the idea is to make sure that the work goes not just from the book to the classroom, but from the book to the classroom outside to the city. The idea is to make sure that we take into account the major subjects of interest to the people, using Portuguese, obviously, but we also work with indigenous peoples and with the migrant peoples. And so even though we have most of these guidebooks drafted in Portuguese, we also have to make sure that they're understood by the migrants and that they're understood by the indigenous peoples, and make sure that all of this is related to the Sustainable Development Goals. So Sao Paulo is therefore a relevant example in Brazil of all of this work that we have done in training teachers, for instance, training trainers. We have what we call sustainable schools. You can see a picture right there. And these are just some ideas and some pictures of the kind of schools that we have been developing. Environmental education is a project known as the Proyecto Horta, where we want the students to be able to express themselves in a variety of ways, as to be able to communicate with each other, give each other important information.
Here in this photograph, you can see a concrete action based on SDGs, an event based on SDGs. That is what I wanted to show you. Thank you for the opportunity of talking to you. You've got my contact, and I'm at your disposal for more exchange in future. Thank you, Felipe, for your presentation and all your experience. So education can not only be formal, but also informal to integrate sustainability. Now, I'll ask all panelists to connect their cameras because we come to Q&A. Interesting questions have been coming in. As you know, it's already late, but presentations have inspired us a lot and have obviously been important for our participants. So I'm going to summarize several questions into different groups and the main important groups. And we'll give the floor to all panelists. Here is the major question I want to share with you. The objective of ESD 2030 should not only build a sustainable world, but also an equitable, a fair world. Environmental matters are important, but this common challenge should include other themes which are so important for us: poverty, economic inequality. That is in the very center of the Agenda 2030. So how do we want to integrate this in the curricula and educational programs? Henry, would you like to start? Thank you, Christian. Thank you for the question. That is, yes, very correct. It's very important to define where we're starting from and what we're talking about. We have to be clear about the concepts of our curricula. What are we talking about exactly? Environment, economics, and society. And we are, of course, concentrated on SDG 47, sustainability, cultural and social life. And all that gives us a platform to work on. Educational ministries also pursue other policies, not only for environmental sustainability, but also other approaches, equality and respect, for example. And that is the theoretical structure. And we have been trying to integrate it in every curriculum that we have been revising. There have been previous consultations, of course. The educational community is included, and other stakeholders of society, so as to get an integral picture. Thank you. Thank you, Henry. Yes, different elements make up ESD. Angelica, what do you think about this question? Yes, how do we see the curriculum? We want to support teachers so that they can bring up these themes in the classroom. And of course, this has to start from the right curriculum. As Henry said, it's not that there is a special subject of sustainability or environment. No, it's cross-cutting, it's intersectoral. All stakeholders can deal with sustainability. And in fact, it's a great help that we can design all this in the curriculum, because otherwise, for the teacher, it's just more work. We all work in education, and everything centers on schools. Schools have to be the main driving force for transformation. So teachers get plenty of invitations, and they say, well, how shall I include this? I don't really have time for this. My curriculum is already overburdened, and I only have so much time for it. So it's important to support teachers and to encourage them to deal with these matters, which make their teaching more significant, because students are living in this environment. You said learn what they live and live what they learn. They open their doors and go out and smell the polluted river and stumble over waste which isn't disposed properly. So all this becomes much more significant if students really participate, if they become active, and if they're part of the solution, so that they can think of solutions and propose them and then be part of them. Thank you, Angelica. Ana Maria and her colleague from Ecuador. What do you think about this major question? Well, it's a matter of integrating the different sectors of society. That's what we always have to look out for. It's not a matter of teaching sustainability as something theoretical. Schools should really feel that sustainable development is part of their daily life and their daily work. Ana Maria has concrete experience. Yes, it's always difficult to see ESG as a holistic theme and not only as something environmental. We need a multiple approach. ESD has to be integrated in formal education through cross-cutting and multidisciplinary approach. On the other hand, let's not forget real life. If we start from real experience, learners it will ring a bell with them. And this is the idea. They should change their habits, their consumption habits, for example. They should be environmentally friendly. And we talked about values and tolerance as well. To consume food which has been produced with by an equitable workforce. We have to protect nature, sure, but we also have to protect people and workers. So Galapagos thinks that these SDGs are not a subject in and of themselves. They are a cross-cutting theme which should lead to a change of habits and transform human beings so that they can change their environment. Thank you, Ana Maria and Vice Minister. That's very interesting. Yes, sustainable development is not a silo in education. It's something broad and cross-cutting and connected with the local level so that communities can actually participate. Grumira has the floor. What do you think about this?
Okay, so sustainable development is interlinked. So all the 17 SDGs need to be in tandem with each other to be able to meet all the different concepts of people, prosperity, peace, partnerships, and the planet. So it's important to take it from multiple levels and different approaches, especially from a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So from the top-down, it's important to integrate this into the policy. In my country, we have the Vision 30 plan, which is directly integrated into these Agenda 2030. And it promotes sustainable living, sustainable lifestyles, and integrating all the different concepts. And when that filters down into the different sectors, because we have to follow a multi-sector approach to addressing sustainable development, that is how it filters from the top down. But from the bottom up, it's important, and ESD plays a critical role in meeting the communities at that point to make sure that they understand the different tiers and they understand how the goals interlink with each other and what is relevant to them. So I could give the examples of one of the communities that we worked with at Risk Youth, and poverty is a big issue for them. But we have them show them that, okay, maybe this is your issue, but if you integrate different concepts, maybe you can have overall change. So if you plant some trees, it prevents the siltation of the rivers so that people can have potable drinking water, but it also provides food for your families and food security. So that increases the level of poverty for you. So it's how to put the pieces together and help them integrate that into their daily lives.
Thank you so much, Carmira, for your intervention. Como nos decía, cierto, ahora tenemos también este elemento de cómo también pensamos en iniciativas que responden.
Yes, we also have to think of initiatives which correspond to different motives. How can we integrate a virtuous circle of different elements and actions which are not only environmental, but also a contribution to sustainability of lifestyles and development? And finally, Felipe. Maybe I'll repeat what has already been said. This is our big challenge. We have to include learners and students as we set up new curricula. That's very important because they live in their communities, and it's important that they all see curricula as something challenging and thrilling. And then, of course, it's important to bring up these themes in all subjects in a cross-cutting way. In Brazil, what is most common is to talk about these things in science, but it's not enough. It affects everything, because sustainable development affects every bit of life. Thank you, Felipe. Yes, communication will be important so that we can concentrate on our priorities for ESD. And then we have to combine capacity building and training. We have very little time left. So I would like to invite our panelists, and I'm going to share my screen because we're coming to the second part of our meeting, and we want to talk about the way forward. There are two questions on which we'd like to have your opinion. How can we work in the implementation of ESD for 2030? Which support, what do you expect of UNESCO? And what do you expect of the country initiative ESD for 2030? We have a hand raised. Rodolfo. Yes, you have the floor. Thank you. But you have to switch on your microphone. Rodolfo Beltran, yes, we can hear you. Thank you. Congratulations to UNESCO, Latin America, and all participants. It's an excellent forum, one of the best I've heard about these matters of education and its role in sustainable development. I have two questions to ask quite briefly. COP26 is going to take place towards the end of the year. And this UNESCO initiative on ESD should be adopted to reach a consensus so that all schools integrate and include it. And when students come back to school, it won't be the same school, it will be much better than before. With all these proposals we heard from Latin American colleagues, this could be an introduction to sustainable development and also generate work in the green economy. So it will create jobs and train us all for a better future. Once again, thank you to UNESCO. Thank you, Rodolfo. Yes, the Berlin Declaration gives us the possibility of integrating this message in different fields. In fact, COP26 and COP21 give us the possibility of integrating all this within the environmental commitments. There's another hand raised. Leonard Miguel Bosman. Luis. Yes. Miguel, can you please switch on your microphone and ask your question? Thank you so much. Hello, congratulations to UNESCO and to all panelists. Your experiences were very interesting. I have a question, which is the following. Sometimes these subjects are taught in the classroom, and when we talk about teachers about sustainable development and environmental sustainability, what they say is that it doesn't necessarily correspond to local reality. Private enterprise or industry, for example, works differently, or even sometimes state authorities do not quite work like that. My question to panelists is this: what is taught in the classroom? How can it be harmonized with what is with life around the classroom? For circular economy, for example, have you agreed on that with private enterprise, which is essentially competitive? So often what we find is that our students say, but this is ideal, but we'll never make it. I don't know, maybe one of our panelists wants to answer?
Anyone wants to take this up? Ana Maria, go right ahead. Well, yes, to try and give an answer from our vantage point in Galapagos, what we've done in Galapagos, bringing together interests of various sectors so as to build a single vision, a single shared vision as a community or as a society. What we expect from education in Galapagos, what do we want as a community? All sectors involved, not just education, teachers, parents, business, tourism, NGOs, governmental representatives, educational authorities, so as to try and build a consistent vision of quality education in keeping with Sustainable Development Goal number 4. I wonder whether there are any other countries in the region that are promoting a model similar to what we're doing in Ecuador with multi-stakeholder participation. Thank you. Thank you very much, Angelica, if you can be brief, because we're really short of time. Well, to go back to what Ana Maria was saying, with our green schools, they're part and parcel of a network, SDG 17, creating alliances, sharing objectives with community-based organizations and with private business, all involved. The idea is to transform everything, not just one single sector, so to reach a new consensus. We have projects with the schools, with the participation of business and civil society. It's not just the state and the state schools, but also business involved. I could go on and on and on, but you asked me to be brief. And this is a beautiful transformational experience for all of us. Thank you. Yes, of course it is. We have a meeting in this same room coming up now, so we have to come to a conclusion very quickly. Luis, can you give the floor to Alicia, Eva, and Carlos Saavedra so we can hear what they've got to say? Alicia, please carry on. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm in Costa Rica. A question on the subject of the country initiative 2030, what the projects are going to be nationwide. Is there to be one single national initiative bringing together all of the various projects in the country, or are there going to be different national initiatives? That's question number one. And two, on teacher training, how can we unite our efforts to accelerate teacher training, which is a subject of primary interest to us? And we would love to be able to accelerate this process to enhance and increase teacher training possibilities in the region. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alicia. Well, the country initiative seeks to bring together in a strategic area the various initiatives to be developed, either by the state or civil society or by academic institutions, so as to bring some consistency. So the idea is that there should be internal coordination, and we in UNESCO obviously are available to provide this coordination. In San Jose, Costa Rica, we have an office. They can help you in this process, so as to be able to establish dialogue among the various stakeholders. Carry on, please. Ms. Eva Escalona. Good morning. I'm very pleased to be able to take part in this technical meeting. And we hope that all countries will be able to support the initiatives. And in the particular case of Cuba, we can share the experience that we've had already for some time of incorporating into school curricula all of the subjects related to education for sustainable development. But reference earlier was made to how the students have to participate in the elaboration of this curriculum and their families as well. And we pay particular attention to teacher training right from the word go. So we have designed postgraduate training courses on these very subjects. And also everything connected with the preparation of the families. We do this through our family education schools so as to prepare society as a whole. But we must mention also the projects that we have developed together with UNESCO, as well as other international bodies that can continue to be developed in the future and be made even more generalized. Cuba is in this position to be able to experience, to share the experience we have in this area. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, madam. As I said, we have a planning EDS 2030 network within which you can share this experience. I would ask you also, please, to share with us all the relevant material with all the participants in this meeting. Carlos, over to you now. Hi. Hello to everyone. I want to thank UNESCO, thank all the panelists. You've dealt with so very many important subjects. In Colombia, we want to celebrate the UNESCO Declaration on Education for Sustainable Development, reminding us that sustainability is not a dogma, it's not a theory, it's not just an agenda. It's a pillar for the welfare of society, and hence the relevance of education to contribute to a committed citizenship. And therefore, I wanted to congratulate you all and highlight one particular aspect, which is a major challenge in Colombian public policy and the commitments that we have been undertaking over the years in various international events and in the framework UN Convention on Climate Change, i.e. the transition to sustainability has a tremendous impact on the labor market. Some industries disappear, others transform themselves, others become more important, and hence education, particularly tertiary education, university education is key in its connection with the world of labor. The transition in the world of labor is huge. Overcoming poverty, overcoming gender disparities, overcoming ethnic differences, overcoming rural lack of access to education. All of that is a tremendous challenge. Thank you. Thank you indeed. These are very important themes to be considered. As you've said, labor creating new jobs, some jobs disappear, others will be created. These are subjects that no doubt will require further thinking in the future. And now, our colleague, Mary Winderlin, who is the head of transformational education, transformative education for Latin America and the Caribbean. Please, if you can share your thoughts with us now. Thank you very much, Christian. What a way to finish the week with this tremendous panel. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the members of the panel for their participation. Thank also all the members of the public who have been with us today in this live streaming of the meeting. In this way, we've had a very thorough framework. We've been speaking about policies, transforming environment, teacher training, empowering young people, the role of their families. All of these things are key to behavioral change and change the world in which we live. More than 90 participants. At one point, we had attending this meeting, and I'm sure many others outside Zoom on other platforms have been listening. This is the first attempt at getting together all the various people involved in sustainable development education in Latin America. And it works. And our hope is that this will be an open invitation to all of you to come and join us in this effort at designing national strategies and country initiatives for 2030. We know that the COVID-19 crisis has forced us to change many of our plans upend our priorities, our economic and social agendas in all of our countries. The idea being, obviously, to make sure that we curb the nefarious impact of the pandemic and to rebuild a better world later, leaving no one behind. And so, in the light of all the experiences and initiatives that we have heard today, you can see that there are many, many advanced activities. We're not starting from scratch. We're building on the basis of something that has already been to a large extent implemented in many countries. We need to refocus, reorient, regear, obviously, to make sure that there's the right to education from the vantage point of this very transformative approach. We also know that other cross-cutting subjects that education for sustainable development should not just be present in the teaching of natural science, but also be part and parcel of the mainstream, of the educational mainstream. Even though we recognize the big battle that Angelica mentioned, I think this was at the time where there was vying for space in the curriculum. But after all, what we want is something that is going to be essential, not just for today's society, but also going forward. And so this will necessarily mean changing the educational environment, changing the way in which we teach, changing the way in which we learn, changing in the way in which we live what we learn, and learn what we live. And this means new approaches altogether in teacher training, in initial teacher training, in like lifelong teacher training, not just from a disciplinary viewpoint, as we said earlier, but also in the new contents and toolboxes required to provide the necessary inspiration to young people, to transform them into agents of change now and in the future. At the beginning of our meeting, the director emphasized the fact that education was the key to transforming people so that people can transform our world in order to ensure our survival and the survival of future generations. And in a region such as ours, in a world such as ours, which is so complex, with tremendous biodiversity, with tremendous wealth of natural resources, where the impact is felt not just in our countries, but the world throughout. And so many communities are affected, communities in conflict with each other, with high degrees of tension, with outrageous development models based on extreme extraction of natural resources. We need to educate ourselves in order to better participate in the transformations to come and to bring about greater cooperative commitment. And this is what we mean by transformative education. Endow people throughout their lifetimes with necessary skills and values and attitudes and qualifications in order to bring about a fairer, more peaceful world, which is based on equity and solidarity. Let me reiterate the invitation that we extend through this meeting to all of you to continue cooperating in a future where education for sustainable development would become a key to the transformation of all of us through education. And Henry, Angelica, Cynthia, Kermira, Felipe, Christian Bravo, thank you very much to each and all of you for your leadership. Thank you to all our colleagues at headquarters, Juan and Abdul, who have been helping us throughout. Our technical team, Luis Pino, he is the wizard, always in the dark, but the most important connectivity person, and our interpretation team as well, and technicians. Thank you all for your participation and inputs. And as we said earlier, this is the first, but definitely not the last time that we're going to be meeting. So good afternoon to all of you and have a happy weekend. Thank you very much, Mary Gwynn. This brings us to a close. Ana Maria Los from Ecuador also is to be greeted. This brings us to an end, and there will be other opportunities for us to meet with each other again and continue delving into these very important subjects. Thank you very much indeed to all of you for your participation.
Que pasen buen día. Saludos desde Costa Rica. Nos vemos.
Muchas gracias. Saludos desde Galápagos.
Muchas gracias.